It happened a few years ago, when I was 15, a sophomore in high school. It seemed like just another November Friday night in my quiet home in Ohio. I live on the border of the country area, with a thick forest and further on, a field across from my house. I should probably note that I only had a few houses surrounding me. Not really many of my friends lived where I was. There was the old couple to my left. They usually have family over on the weekends, but tonight it was quiet and calm over there. To my right, there was a middle-aged couple. They were gone that night, as they work night shifts at whatever they work. Finally, across and far down to the left of my house was another nice couple who have a very sweet 4-year-old who always loved to come over and be with me and my 9-year-old brother. My parents decided to go out and be together for the night. Whenever they do this, they came usually out pretty late, into the morning, and my brother was sleeping over at a friend's house. I was tired that night, so I decided to stay home and enjoy a relaxing night at home while the snow began to fall throughout the night. I was mostly uneventful that evening, some television early on, and then some Xbox too later on. I remember eating some rice and chicken that night, but it would be important to note also that I neither drank or did any drugs that night, so I knew what to come was real. The clock just struck 11 p.m. only a few minutes back, and I was well into a fun match of Halo when I got that feeling something was just wrong. I brushed it off as just me being alone and getting those weird feelings when you're home alone. Then, just as it began to slip my mind, I heard it. Fear gripped me for moments as I realized that sound was neither from me or my TV. It was much louder and clearer than anything that could have come from the TV. I turned white as I realized it came from the window right above the couch, and me. I turned around and lifted the blinds to see no one. Nothing out of sorts. The snow was falling and everything looked normal. Oh, I thought to myself, probably just rocks carried by the wind, or maybe snow or ice from the roof that fell. Despite this, I was still gripped with this feeling that something was just wrong, and that whatever hit that window was no accident or nature. I then decided to quench my nerves by going into the office and playing games or watching porn on the computer, just something to get my mind off of that. For about 30 minutes it worked. I thought to myself, I'm just being silly, and I should enjoy this quality time home by myself. About 34 or 38 minutes after my first occurrence, there came a... From the window to my right in the office, I wanted to throw up. I knew then that this was no coincidence and that this was not the weather or any animal. It was too consistent, too intentional. I immediately ran from my seat to the kitchen, where I grabbed the family flashlight and a large knife, one for investigation and one for defense, if what to come was as bad as my gut was telling me. I ran back down and shined the flashlight out the window into the yard and the forest. I saw nothing, except what I thought were light footprints from the window to the forest in the dry snow on the ground. My mind raced from what this could be to what could happen. I had never been embraced by this much fear in my life. I called my mom, hoping she would answer. Once I was able to reach her, I told her the events of the night, and she then said, in a hopeful yet dead serious tone, "Lock the doors. If it happens again, call the cops. Be safe." My parents were about an hour and a half away, and they offered to come home, but I refused, trying to be considerate of not ruining their evening together. I went to each door and locked them, to each window and locked them up too, holding my phone, a knife, and a flashlight. I still rejected that this could be serious, so I put on some music from my phone and put my earbuds in, hoping to fall asleep and wake up realizing This was just a nightmare or a bad case of my head messing with me. I was listening to Queen and on the verge of sleep when I thought I heard something in the completely quiet house. I took my earbuds off of my ear. With each beat, my heart sank more and more. After a few moments, it stopped, but I was too afraid to move from my bed, and I called my parents. Within about 45 minutes, my parents come home, without further incident. By this time, it was about 3 a.m. I recalled as much as I could and showed them everything. The three of us searched the outside of the house, with my dad holding his handgun in case we didn't find anything. Again, nothing was found, except for deep footprints in the several-inch deep snow, now that circled the house several times, stopping in front of the windows and the side door, which upon inspection was beat and crushed in the center with what seemed like a big hammer or blunt object. We waited in the house until morning, until my dad decided to go outside to the forest to see where the tracks led. When he came back, we learned that the tracks led to a small shelter that housed several photographs of our house and a small sledgehammer with pieces of wood stuck on it, with tracks leading to a road far across the field. I never stayed in the house alone at night for several years after this. I will start out by saying I'm 20, and I've had weird things happen to me since I can remember. I live in Nebraska. I grew up in a house that apparently was built near some burial grounds, which is the only way I think anything ever happened considering we built the house. This is one of my crazier stories when I actually had someone experience it with me. As a child, I remember never feeling alone when I was. There was always something watching me. Things moved in my room on their own. I had a tiny porcelain angel given to me by my dad that has a specific spot, and it'd always be somewhere else when I came back into my room. Something would knock on my doors and walls. I'd get scratched, and they'd bleed for hours, even though they were tiny surface scratches. Stuff fell over or straight up across the room, and doors would slam. When I was in 6th grade, I had a friend spend the night when my family was out with friends and we were alone. My sister used to play scary pranks on me. Her friends would wear masks and knock on my windows and scare at me through a big window in my house. My mom didn't believe in curtains, so anyone could just stare into the house. Damn you, Mom. Anyways, when we were dropped off at my house, the first thing I did was lock every single door. I didn't fuck around as a child, and I knew at this point that the sounds in my home weren't normal, so I was always paranoid and locking everything all the time. So everything is locked and every light is on. But remember, I have 0 curtains or blinds on any of the windows, and it's also December with 2 feet of snow on the ground. We head downstairs and put a movie on. Just some quick info. My house wasn't built well. You can hear what everyone's doing from every single room. I also had a very prissy and sensitive dog who barked when you stood up and constantly growled at any sound she heard. I could not walk into the room without her barking. Annoying, yes, but I also have to think about the shit she saw and heard in that house the hours we were gone. She was down there chilling with me and my friend. This is like 2008, so we still had a landline phone. I had a cell phone as everyone did at that point, and our home phone was never used. There was one in the kitchen, my mom's room, and basement. Halfway through the movie, we hear footsteps upstairs. Cool, my parents or sister was home, and I thought maybe I had the TV up too loud and missed the garage opening up, which was definitely closed when we got home. There was no key to any door, so unless the front door was unlocked, which it wasn't, the garage was the only way in. I turned the TV down and called up to them. Nobody answered, so I called my sister's name, and nothing. My dog is quite annoyed and growling loudly at this point. There is a door that goes outside in my basement, and she's staring at it like she wants to go potty. but I think she was trying to get the hell out of there. I decided to call my parents and sister and they weren't home. I didn't mention anything to them and quickly hung up. Stupid, right? They never believe the sounds and things that happened to me in the house, so I decided not to bother them with something else. At this point, it's been 5 minutes and they're still walking around, except they are now stomping in what sounds like a circle. Like stomping in a circle in the same spot, but it's right above us in the living room. My selfish ass decides to sacrifice my dog and I send her upstairs. This is when I knew something was wrong. She gets up the stairs and sits and begins to whimper when she should be barking her little ass off. As this is hitting me, my cell phone rings and it's my home phone calling me from inside the house. I answer and they hung up right away. I tell my friend to get her shit together because she is crying and my phone rings again. This time, there's distinct breathing and a wheezing sound like the death wheeze when someone's about to die. I hung up so fast and when I did, the pounding steps stop. I whisper to my friend to slowly walk to the door that leads outside and she makes it over to me as I get the door open. I shit you not, this still absolutely freaks me out. As we're about to step our bare ass feet outside, the steps pound to the stairs and they are booking it down my stairs. They were very fast. I've never jumped into the snow as fast as I did, and I remember a ton of it landing inside the basement, so I was forced to leave the door open. We are sprinting around my house to the street. Part way up the street, something stops me and I turn around. All of the cold air seemed to melt away and pause with me. It was like all of my senses, but my sight just vanished and I froze. There's a figure standing in the kitchen, waving at us. Not like the waving when you see someone you know and you're like, "Hey girl," and waving like an idiot. This was like its elbow was still and its arm was waving side to side. Like creepy ass waving. I was only 50 feet away, and I should have been able to make out some details or features about this person. But it was just a black silhouette, as if they were completely painted black from head to toe. It's just fucking waving at me, and I can't take my eyes away. It was unlike any trance I've never been in. And when I come to, my friend is screaming in my face and is trying to pull me away. I call my parents about a mile away from my home, when I literally can't feel my feet anymore, and they race home. They walk all around the house, trying before going in, and not only everything is locked, the basement door I left wide open was closed and locked, and all the snow that had come in was gone. Not even a wet spot of carpet, but our footprints were there. It was so fucking odd, and nobody was in the house. No other footprints around the home but ours. This is 100% real. My friend told everyone and nobody ever wanted to stay at my house, which caused me to have some bad birthday parties, but I completely understand. I still don't know what happened. I'm still paranoid about being alone. But I'm in an apartment now. That's very secure. I just wish I knew what had happened that day. I was good with kids. I liked them, but they seemed to love me. So I ended up doing a lot of babysitting work when I was 17. Childcare, if you want to make it sound more professional. It was an easy way to make money, usually just by playing. I liked their little weird minds and the bizarre things kids would say, so it was fine by me. But after I babysat George, I stopped. George wasn't the problem. George was lovely. He was 6 and still had big cute chubby cheeks. The best thing was he mostly played on his own, and then all I would have to do was just keep an eye on him. I would read a book nearby while he got lost in his own world. Both his mom and dad had important jobs to do, and if the long hours they worked didn't show it, then the size of their house did. It was 4 stories high, and the lawn in the garden stretched way back with different types of trees each side. It was summer, and so I was looking after George most days during the school break. The weather was good, so we played outside a lot. Well, I kept an eye on him as he ran around, imagining adventures from the looks of it, or playing with his toys on the grass, marching his dinosaurs amongst the flowers. After a while, George always seemed to play in the same area at the end of the garden, next to one particular tree. It was the tallest tree, a big thick oak tree. I just guess. That was his favorite spot. I noticed he started using the name Jack a lot in his games. Then he started to look as if he was talking to someone. I'd never had an imaginary friend myself, or looked after a kid who'd had one before. I didn't know much about child psychology, but he was an only child with workaholic parents, so I guess it made sense. One afternoon the clouds were becoming darker, and it looked like it was about to pour down, so I called George to come inside. He angrily said that he didn't want to because he was playing with Jack. It took me by surprise. This was the most disobedient I'd ever heard of him. I kept my calm and asked, "Why don't you and Jack both come inside then?" George said Jack could not come inside because he was tied to the tree. I put on my stern voice and furrowed my eyebrows, something I hadn't had to do with George until then, and I firmly told him to come inside. He looked back at the tree, nodded, and then marched in. Later that day, it occurred to me that George only said the name Jack when he was near that tree. Later, when George was eating the banana sandwiches I made for him for lunch, I asked him why Jack was tied to the tree. He said that he had heard one of the mates, so the master had tied him to the tree as a punishment. I think I still only found it interesting at this point, funny even. Kids and their imaginations. After that, I noticed that George had started to whisper to Jack. When George had played with Jack before, it always used to seem like fun, but now it seemed different. I would strain my ears to hear, but I couldn't make out what George was whispering. I asked him what he was talking about with Jack, and he would just answer, "Nothing at all." Something about the rhythm in how he said it felt wrong, like it was just being parodied back, but I thought that he could have picked it up from a movie or anywhere. Not long after I had to use that stern voice with George again, I found him rooting around under the kitchen sink, in the cupboard, where the bleach and all the other poisonous bottles was. But he was after the saws, hacksaws, coping saws, and a handsaw. My mind twirled like I was drunk on a carousel, while I tried to make sense of it. He'd met a pile of the saws next to him on the tiles. He looked up at me, and his eyes widened when he recognized the horror on my face, the horror which was quickly turned into anger. Then I really shouted at him, "What the hell are you doing? You mustn't even mess with these things, ever. These are very dangerous. This is such a naughty thing to do." Those sorts of things. I felt my own parents' discipline from years ago, channeling through me. He looked up at me, all the while with his bottom lip wobbling, and when I finally had finished, he burst into tears. I hugged him and told him it was just because I was so worried and that he was a good boy, really. He said that he just wanted to help Jack. I didn't know what to do. I was no therapist, but I thought, hell, if I played along with it, maybe I could stop anything like this happening again. "Did Jack ask you to help him?" George didn't say anything. "Why don't I talk to Jack?" "No." George's eyes widened. "Why not?" "I just want to explain to him how he got you into trouble. Then he won't ask you to do anything again." "No, don't. He's my friend." I didn't like how stubborn he was being. And not just because he was being difficult. He wasn't usually like this. He seemed scared. If he is your friend, then he will understand. I turned and started to walk to the garden. I reached the tree and positioned myself looking at a place where I guessed an invisible child might be, and ignored my feelings that this was ridiculous. "Jack, I know you wanted George to help you, but he mustn't go near the saws or tools because it's dangerous and he'll get into trouble. So I'm sorry, but he can't help you." I turned to George. "Okay, now I think we should go inside." I stopped in shock as I felt a sharp pain in the back of my leg. It felt like something had pinched me. I immediately looked back, but there was nothing. Something felt bad, like the air pressure around us had dropped. And when I turned back to George, he looked like he was about to cry. "Let's go inside," I said flatly and held his hand. The weather turned quite bad for the rest of the week, so we stayed inside. Whatever had caused this pinching feeling had made a mark, but I reasoned myself that it was more than likely an insect bite, a nasty one, maybe. There was an old photograph I'd walked past by 100 times, framed and hung in the hallway of the house. I'd never stopped and properly looked at the picture before. It was a picture of the house staff from 1898. Amongst the butlers, cooks, and maids, there was a little boy. It might have been the contrast of saturation from the old-fashioned photography, but his eyes seemed dark and unpleasant. My eyes ached as I focused on him for too long, as if I was waiting for him to move. I tore myself away from the picture and went to find George. 3 days later, I was tidying up when I found a kitchen knife in George's toy box. It was the biggest one from the knife rack. My heart jerked like a car crash collision. I marched back into the living room, and George looked up from where he was playing on the floor. You come with me right now," I yelled, my voice wavering and failing at every point it could. He followed behind me as I stopped back to the playroom. "What the hell do you think you're doing with—" I looked down, and the knife wasn't there. It was gone. I started to dig through the toys, clawing through the bears and cars, but I couldn't find it. Pain burst and spread up the back of my leg, and I snapped back up straight. I turned around just in time to see the knife hit the floor, like it had just been dropped. George jumped from the noise of the crash the knife made as it landed about 2 meters away from him. Between us, we both didn't say anything. I felt blood trickling down the back of my leg. George burst into tears. He fought against his own sobs and managed to bawl out his words. "I'm so sorry. I let him free. I shouldn't have done it. I helped Jack get free from the tree. I shouldn't have. I am so sorry. He's a nasty boy. He's a nasty boy. I'm sorry." I grabbed George. I grabbed his coat, grabbed my bag, and took it straight out through the front door. His dad was incredibly pissed off, and he had been dragged out of a meeting and called back home from work to find us sat on the porch steps. I think he thought I wasn't noticing his eyes rolling, as I couldn't explain properly what had just happened. I was definitely meant to notice the dirty look he gave me when George started crying that he didn't want to go back inside the house ever again. That's when I left. I walked away down their gravel path and didn't look back as I heard George start wailing. I didn't even go back to look after George. I was pretty sure they wouldn't have wanted me back after how unstable I must have seemed. I declined any other offers of work from other parents. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel guilty for leaving George. It definitely weighed heavy on my thoughts over the weeks and months and then years. It did get easier to not remember sometimes, but I couldn't forget. At the time, I didn't admit it to myself, but looking back, it was 100% the reason that my choices led me to getting a degree in child psychology at university, and now I'm doing particularly well in the field, my secret personal penance of sorts. I thought I might get some closure on it all when one day I had a familiar patient assigned to me at his parents' request. This was unusual, but when the boy walked into my office, 8 years older now, I understood. He doesn't want to be called George anymore. He only answers to Jack. I asked him where George is. He said he's tied to the tree. I live in a 2-story house. We moved here with my parents and sister 11 years ago. I always hated this house, not only because it was abandoned, since my grandfather died when I was very young, and obviously it was his house, but also because the kids in the neighborhood always said that it was haunted. I was never an avid believer of the paranormal, and I never needed a nightlight to help me fall asleep. I've killed the monster in my closet a long time ago, but everything changed when we had to move to this house. My father got a better job, and since his father's house was abandoned for over 30 years, it had to be renovated. So we sold our old house, we renovated the new one, and we finally moved. The new floors and the fresh painted walls could not hide that sense of unease we were feeling. After the renovation, we built a second floor, so mine and my sister's room was on the top floor and my parents' room was at the bottom. The first night was very hard, and so the nights that followed. I remember very vividly falling asleep and waking up all night from terrible nightmares. The same thing continued happening for 2 months, and it wasn't happening only to me, but to my mother and sister too, when it finally stopped. I started school the next month, and my sister found a job at a local art studio. She was helping a crazy dude, because he had a terrible habit of leaving his paintings unfinished. So my father was at work, I was at school, my sister was at her work, and my mother was staying home every day since she couldn't work. I overheard one conversation once when I was coming down the stairs. I remember that she was complaining about things around the house being missing or being moved from their original places. I never thought too much of it, since she used to lose things a lot. After about 7 or 8 months, I can't exactly remember when, something happened. It was raining very hard one night. I was sleeping on my bed in my own bedroom when I felt a soft touch on my shoulder. I opened my eyes and I saw my sister standing next to my bed. I could not see her face, but I could feel that she was afraid and that something was wrong. My sister was fearless, that's why I wanted to be like her. But that night, she was so terrified that her hands were shaking. I asked her what happened, and what she said made my blood run cold. There is someone under my bed. I had no idea how to respond and what to do. The first thing that I thought was that I was still dreaming, and this was a nightmare. But it wasn't. "Can you come to my room so we can look together?" she said. I nodded yes. She took me by the hand, and soon we grabbed our flashlights, we turned on the lights, and of course we found nothing. I had to ask again what exactly happened, and she told me that she heard knocks that were coming in sets of 4 under her bed, like someone was knocking and waiting for a response. I was so creeped out, and of course she and I could not sleep alone for the rest of the night, so we decided to sleep together on her bed. This was a huge mistake, because what happened next is the reason why I always sleep with one light on now. I don't know how much time have passed, since the first incident, but I was woken up by a knocking that was coming in sets of 4. I opened my eyes and I pinched myself to make sure I wasn't sleeping. No, it was real. Someone or something was knocking under my sister's bed. You could hear the knockings coming and going through her small pillow. I stayed up all night until the knocking stopped, right before 6 a.m. My sister continued hearing the same knocking for like a week, until it finally stopped. She learned how to sleep with it, but I didn't. I could hear it echoing through the wood floor. Under my sister's bedroom is her kitchen, and there is no way for my parents to be up that late at night. So what the hell was making that noise? And why it stopped? Now, I am going to tell you about an incident that happened to me right before I left for university. My sister got married, and I was getting ready to go study at a university in a new city away from where I was living. One night, I remember waking up from a weird dream I had. It was very weird, but I can't recall what exactly I saw. I remember that I was feeling like the ground was shaking, and that is the reason why I woke up. I was so stressed, and I could not sleep. So I was on my phone, looking at some pictures, when I heard something. I heard a whisper that sounded like someone was calling me. I'm still not sure. The wooden floor creaked lightly. I put down my phone, and I'm sitting on my bed looking on the other side of my room, where my sister's room is, and where the noise came from. I could not see anything, even with the nightlight on. It was like it was the darkest dark in that room. Another creak. It was like someone was walking on the wooden floor and was coming towards me, but I could not see anyone. Another creak, and that one sounded like it was in my room. I could not move or scream. I had no idea what was making that noise. The only thing I knew is that I didn't want it to come closer. So just for a second, it was like I finally woke up and I could finally move, and I ran to the light switch to turn on the lights. And the mysterious sound stopped. Of course, after that, I was sleeping downstairs on the couch for a month. Fast forward to 3 days before I write this story. I was sleeping on the couch one night. Me and my boyfriend are moving to a new house, so my old room is filled with boxes, and I obviously can't sleep in it. My parents' bedroom is right across from the couch. I was on my phone browsing on Instagram when I saw, from the corner of my eye, a very bright light coming from my parents' bedroom. I decided to stand up and check it out, since my parents were both asleep. I moved into their room, and to my surprise, the TV was on. Okay, that is weird. I went closer to turn it off, and the TV started to changing channels. It was changing channels super fast, and like it was broken or something. I was feeling like there was something behind me, so I turned around, and to my surprise, the living room TV was also on. I searched for the button that shuts down the TV, and I found out that it was already pushed in, which means that the TV shouldn't be on. I unplugged it and I returned to the couch. I was super freaked out. I took the remote control and I turned it off too. For the rest of the night I could not sleep. I was constantly feeling like there was someone watching me, or standing there, with me, in the room, next to the couch, next to me. I still have 2 weeks until I leave, and I have no explanation to what happened, and I'm really worried about my parents and especially about my mom, because she told me that her TV is turning on and off almost every night, and she could also feel a presence in her room. What do you think is going on? I would really appreciate it if you could give me some advice.